It was supposed to be humanity's big moment, the day Earth finally joined the galaxy as equals. After centuries of looking up at the stars and dreaming, they'd built ships that could cross light years, learned to speak with alien minds, and even helped rebuild a damaged space station near Alpha Centauri. But instead of a welcome, they got a sentence. The Galactic Council, made up of ancient species who'd been navigating the stars long before humans lit their first fire, had watched Earth's rise with growing unease. Humans were fast, too fast. They asked too many questions, pushed too hard, and sometimes, in their eagerness, broke things they didn't understand. The final straw came during first contact with the Vrathi, a quiet insect-like species who communicated through scent and vibration. A human science vessel, trying to scan what they thought was an abandoned structure, accidentally triggered a collapse. What they didn't know was that the structure wasn't a building. It was a living memorial, holding the genetic echoes of an entire Vrathi generation lost in a long-ago war. To the Vrathi, it was like watching someone bulldoze a cemetery while taking selfies. The Council didn't see it as a mistake. They saw it as proof. Proof that humans were reckless, emotional, and dangerously unpredictable. No amount of apologies, data logs, or tearful broadcasts from Earth changed their minds. Within weeks, the verdict came down: total exile. Every human outside the Sol system, colonists, traders, diplomats, students, was ordered to return home immediately. Every ship with a human crew was to be grounded. And Earth itself, surrounded by an invisible energy barrier that blocked all signals in or out. Not a prison, the Council claimed, but a quarantine for galactic stability. For millions of people scattered across distant star systems, there was no going back. The barrier snapped shut before evacuation ships could reach them. Families were split. Children born on Mars or Titan suddenly had no home to return to. Panic spread like wildfire through the scattered human outposts. Some tried to fight. Small, desperate strikes against Council patrol drones, but they were swatted down like flies. Others begged for mercy. None came. Amid the chaos, a group of survivors gathered near the edge of known space. They weren't soldiers or politicians, just engineers, teachers, medics, farmers, and a few retired pilots who still knew how to fly. Their ships were mismatched: old cargo haulers, a retired research vessel, even a luxury liner that had been converted into a refugee transport. Fuel was low, food was running out. Morale was lower. But one thing kept them going: the refusal to just disappear. They held a meeting in the cramped mess hall of the largest ship, a former deep space survey vessel. No grand speeches, no dramatic declarations, just tired people trying to figure out how to stay alive one more day. Someone suggested turning back, trying to sneak through the barrier. Another argued they should scatter, hide among asteroid belts, become ghosts. But then an older pilot, someone who'd flown supply runs during Earth's last great drought, stood up. She didn't shout. She just said, "If they want us gone, fine, but we won't die quietly. We'll go where they don't look. And we'll build something they can't ignore." That idea, simple, stubborn, human, became their compass. They plotted a course into the Perseus Arm, a region so far from the Council's trade routes it barely appeared on star charts. It was cold, dark, and full of gravitational anomalies that could tear a ship apart, but it was also empty. And in that emptiness, they saw a chance. The journey took years. Not because of distance alone, but because they had to move slowly, conserving power, repairing hull breaches with scrap metal, recycling every drop of water. Children were born in zero gravity. Elders passed away in sleep, their bodies released into the void with quiet words and folded hands. They lost ships to radiation storms and navigation errors, but they kept going. Not because they believed in destiny, but because stopping meant giving up, and giving up meant letting the Council win. Along the way, they made rules. Not laws exactly, but understandings. Everyone worked. Everyone shared. No hoarding. No violence unless absolutely necessary. Decisions were made together, even if it took hours of arguing and flickering light. They stopped thinking of themselves as Earthlings and started calling themselves the Fleet. It wasn't a name of pride. It was a name of survival. Then, one day their sensors picked up something strange. A rogue gas giant drifting alone through interstellar space, with a single rocky moon caught in its gravity. The moon had no atmosphere, no water, no signs of life, but it had stable geology, metals in its crust, and, most importantly, shelter from cosmic radiation in deep lava tubes. It wasn't paradise. It was barely survivable. But it was solid ground. They landed in silence. No fanfare, no flags, just boots crunching on gray dust as the first group stepped out. Helmets reflecting the swirling clouds of the gas giant above. They set up solar collectors on the surface, drilled into the moon's crust for ice, and sealed off sections of the lava tubes to create pressurized living spaces. At night, though there was no real night, just the dim glow of distant stars, they'd gather around shared heaters, telling stories of Earth, not the wars or the pollution, but the smell of rain on dry soil, the sound of waves on a beach, the taste of fresh bread. They named the moon New Carthage, not after the ancient city that defied Rome, but because someone remembered a line from an old history book: Carthage must be remembered, and so must they. Back on Earth, behind the shimmering barrier, people watched the stars and wondered if anyone out there still carried their name. They didn't know that far away. In a forgotten corner of the galaxy, humans were already doing more than surviving. They were laying the first stones of something new, something strong, something that would one day echo across the stars, not with weapons or threats, but with the quiet, unbreakable will of people who refused to be erased. The exile had begun as punishment. But for those who lived through it, it became the beginning of everything. Life on New Carthage wasn't just hard. It was a daily test of whether hope could outlast hunger. The moon had no air, no rivers, no green. Just gray rock, bitter cold, and the ever-present hum of the gas giant overhead, its storms swirling like silent watchers. The first winter, though there was no real season, nearly broke them. One of the main oxygen recyclers failed. Food stores ran dangerously low. 2 people died from a lung infection no one had medicine for. Grief hung thick in the sealed tunnels, heavier than the recycled air. But giving up wasn't an option. Not when children were watching. Not when every breath cost energy they barely had. They learned fast. Engineers turned broken ship parts into water condensers. Botanists coaxed algae to grow under LED strips, then used that to feed mushrooms, then used the mushrooms to enrich soil for hardy greens. Nothing was wasted. A torn spacesuit became insulation. A cracked viewport became a greenhouse panel. Even grief was put to use. People started writing down memories of Earth, not as sad stories, but as lessons. My grandmother grew tomatoes in a rooftop bin during the water rationing, someone wrote. If she could do that, we can grow kale in a lava tube. Slowly, life took root. Not the easy kind, but the stubborn kind. The kind that clings to cracks in concrete and still blooms. Tensions, though, simmered beneath the surface. Some believed they should focus only on survival, build walls, stockpile supplies, stay hidden forever. Others argued they needed to prepare for what no one knew. Maybe the council would come looking. Maybe another exile group would arrive. Maybe they'd need to leave again. These weren't loud fights. No shouting matches. Just quiet disagreements over ration portions or shift schedules that carried deeper meaning. Why waste power scanning deep space? One would ask. We should be reinforcing the dome. Because if we don't look outward, another would reply, we become prisoners of our own fear. Out of these debates came something unexpected, a new way of making decisions. They stopped waiting for one leader to tell them what to do. Instead, they gathered in the central chamber every 10 days, what they called a circle. Anyone could speak. No titles, no ranks, just voices in the dim light, sharing fears, ideas, warnings. At first it was messy. People talked over each other. Some stayed silent. But over time they learned to listen. Really listen. And from that listening, trust grew. They also began teaching the children differently. Not just math and science, but history. Not as a list of dates, but as a mirror. Why did Earth fall apart? A teacher might ask. Because people stopped sharing, a child would answer. Because they thought someone else would fix it. Lessons weren't just about surviving the moon. They were about building something better than what they'd left behind. One day, while drilling deeper into the crust for geothermal heat, they struck something strange. A vein of crystalline material that pulsed faintly when exposed to low-frequency sound. It wasn't on any mineral chart. At first they thought it was useless. But a young technician noticed it stored energy incredibly well, better than any battery they had. With careful shaping, they turned it into power cells, then into signal boosters, Then into the core of a new kind of reactor, small enough to fit in a ship but strong enough to run a whole habitat. That discovery changed everything. It wasn't just about more power. It was proof that New Carthage, for all its harshness, held gifts they hadn't expected. They started exploring more of the moon, mapping caves, testing soil samples, even setting up remote sensors on the surface. The gas giant's magnetic field, once seen as a danger, turned out to shield them from cosmic rays. The constant seismic tremors? A sign of geothermal stability. What looked like a wasteland was slowly revealing itself as a home, if you knew how to read it. And then came the first birth on solid ground. Not in a ship, not in zero-G, but in a warm chamber lined with woven fabric made from recycled fibers. The baby cried. A real, loud human cry that echoed off stone walls. People gathered outside, not to celebrate loudly, but to stand in quiet awe. A new life, born not in exile, but in creation. That night, someone played a flute carved from ship plastic. Others hummed old songs. No one spoke much. They didn't need to. The sound said it all. We are still here, and we are growing. But with growth came new questions. How long could they stay hidden? Should they? Some whispered about sending a message, not to Earth, which was still behind the barrier, but outward into the unknown. A simple pulse, a hello, just to see if anyone else was out there, also lost, also trying. The idea terrified some. What if the council hears it? They asked. What if something worse hears it? But others argued that silence was its own kind of death. We didn't survive this far to become ghosts, one said during a circle. We survived to be heard. After days of discussion, they agreed on a compromise. They'd build a low-power beacon, hidden in a deep crater, coded in a way only another human or someone who truly understood human patterns could recognize. Not a shout, a whisper, and they'd wait. While they waited, they kept building. Not just shelters, but systems. Not just for survival, but for dignity. A library of digital books salvaged from ship drives. A workshop where kids learned to weld and code. A garden where real soil, mixed from compost, rock dust, and patience, finally held the roots of carrots and beans. The smell of growing things became the new perfume of New Carthage. Years passed. The fleet was no longer just survivors. They were builders, teachers, inventors, parents. They stopped counting time in Earth years and started using cycles, each one marked by the gas giant's slow rotation. And with every cycle, they added another layer to their society, not top-down, but woven together like fabric. Then, one evening, the deep space scanner beeped. Not a random burst, not noise, a repeating pattern, faint, distant, but clear. Someone had heard their whisper. The room fell silent, hearts pounded, hands trembled. No one spoke for a long time. Then someone said softly, "We're not alone." It wasn't a rescue. It wasn't an invasion. It was just contact. And in that moment, the people of New Carthage realized something. Exile hadn't ended. But it had changed. They weren't just hiding anymore. They were ready to listen, to learn, and maybe one day to reach out. Because survival wasn't the end goal. It was just the beginning. The signal wasn't from Earth. It wasn't from the Council either. It came from a drifting cargo barge, old, battered, and broadcasting in a patchwork of languages, including broken English. On board were refugees from a species the Council had also cast aside. The Qatari, nomadic traders whose ships ran on biofuel and whose culture valued silence more than speech. They'd picked up the human beacon by accident while scanning for salvage. Starving and low on power, they'd followed it like a lifeline. At first, no one knew what to do. Trust was a luxury they couldn't afford. But then someone remembered their own arrival on New Carthage. Lost, desperate, hoping someone would see their humanity. So they sent a small shuttle, not armed, just carrying water, food, and a simple message. You're safe here. That meeting changed everything. The Qatari didn't speak much, but they showed gratitude in actions, repairing damaged solar arrays with woven fungal threads, sharing navigation charts of hidden asteroid belts, teaching how to distill drinkable water from comet ice. In return, humans shared their energy crystals, medical knowledge, and the strange human habit of laughing during hard work. Slowly, a rhythm formed. Not friendship at first, just mutual respect. But that was enough. Word began to spread. Not through broadcasts, but through whispers on the fringe. among smugglers, outcasts, and forgotten colonies. There was a place beyond the Council's reach where help wasn't given with strings attached, where you weren't judged for your past, only asked what you could contribute now. More ships came. Some carried the Gen, a quiet, cybernetically enhanced people who'd been declared unnatural by the Council for merging with machines to heal their dying world. Others brought lone AI units, self-aware programs abandoned when their creators feared what they might become. Each arrival brought new skills, new stories, and new challenges. But instead of fracturing, the community grew stronger. They built a shared language, not just words, but gestures, symbols, even shared music. A Gen engineer might hum a frequency that calmed a stressed child. A Qatari elder would place a hand on a shoulder to say, "I understand." Humans learned to listen not just with ears, but with eyes, with stillness. Technology bloomed in unexpected ways. The energy crystals from New Carthage, when combined with Gen neural circuits, created communication nodes that worked across light years without delay. No more waiting months for a reply. They called it the weave. It wasn't magic. It was physics, patience, and cooperation. With the weave, they could coordinate mining operations on distant asteroids, warn each other of solar flares, even share lessons with children on separate ships. They didn't conquer planets. They healed them. On a dying world choked by toxic dust, they deployed terraforming drones grown from bioengineered seeds that pulled poisons from the soil and replaced them with nutrients. On a frozen moon, they drilled deep to release geothermal heat, then built domes where crops could grow under artificial suns. They didn't claim these places as theirs. They called them shared havens, open to anyone who needed shelter, as long as they respected the rules. No violence, no hoarding, no lies. The Council noticed. Of course they did. At first, they dismissed it as a rogue anomaly, a temporary blip on the edge of civilized space. But as more fringe systems stopped sending tribute, as more outcasts vanished into the Helios network, a name someone coined and it stuck, unease turned to alarm. Patrol drones were sent. They never returned. Not because they were destroyed, but because their crews, after seeing what was being built, chose to stay. One drone pilot, after landing under a sky full of twin moons, walked into the central hall and said, "I was told you were dangerous, but all I see are people planting gardens." That moment became legend. Back on New Carthage, life wasn't perfect. Arguments still happened. Resources still ran low. But the fear had changed. It wasn't fear of dying anymore, it was fear of failing each other. And that kind of fear made people try harder, care deeper. Children grew up speaking 3 languages before they could tie their shoes. They played games that mixed human strategy with Qatari rhythm and Gen logic puzzles. They didn't see themselves as human or alien. They saw themselves as part of something bigger, a web of lives holding each other. Up then came the supernova, a star in a neutral. System, home to 7 small colonies, was collapsing faster than predicted. Millions would be caught in the blast wave. The Council issued a statement. Evacuation is not feasible. Affected systems are advised to prepare spiritually. In other words, you're on your own. But the Helios network didn't wait for permission. Within hours, Arcs, sleek, self-repairing ships built from salvaged hulls and powered by crystal cores, launched from a dozen hidden bases. They arrived before the first shockwave, not with weapons, but with shield harmonics, technology that bent radiation around fragile habitats. They evacuated hospitals, schools, even livestock. They carried the elderly on stretchers woven from recycled fabric. They sang old Earth lullabies to calm frightened children during transit. And when the blast came, the colonies stood, not untouched, but protected. Lives were saved. Not because of one hero, but because hundreds of people from a dozen species worked as one. Afterward, the rescued colonies didn't just say thank you. They joined. They shared their own knowledge. How to grow food in low light, how to purify water with sound waves, how to build homes that breathed with the wind. The network grew not by force, but by gratitude. The Council tried to spin it as a trick. They're buying loyalty, their broadcasts claimed. But people weren't fools. They'd seen the truth with their own eyes. Help had come when no one else cared. And so quietly, the balance of the galaxy began to shift, not with war drums, but with shared meals. Not with declarations, but with open doors. The exiles weren't hiding anymore. They were building a new kind of civilization, one where strength wasn't measured in weapons but in how many hands reached out to lift someone else up. And as their ships glided between stars carrying seeds, medicine, and hope, they proved something the Council had never understood, that the most powerful force in the universe isn't control, it's connection. The Council didn't send a warning. They sent a fleet, hundreds of ships, sleek, silver, humming with the cold precision of ancient power, appeared at the edge of the Helios network like a storm rolling in. Broadcasts crackled across every channel. Surrender your technology. Disband your alliance. Return to quarantine status. Resistance will be erased. For the first time in decades, fear returned to the settlements. Not the old fear of starvation or silence, but the sharp gut deep dread of being hunted again. Parents held their children tighter. Engineers double-checked shield harmonics. Pilots ran drills in the dark, their faces lit only by console glow. But this time, it wasn't just humans preparing. Qatari weavers reinforced hulls with living fibers. Gen technicians synced neural networks to predict enemy movements. Even the quiet AI units, once seen as outcasts, now coordinated defense grids with calm, steady logic. Still, no one wanted to fight. Not really. They'd built something too precious to risk in a blaze of fire. So they sent a message, not a threat, but an offer. Talk to us, it said. See what we've made. Maybe you'll understand. The Council didn't reply. They fired. The first strike hit a farming outpost orbiting a quiet blue planet. Not a military base, just greenhouses floating in space, growing food for 3 colonies. The blast was clean, surgical, and utterly merciless. Crops vaporized. Lives lost. Silence followed. That silence broke something in the network. Not rage, there was no shouting, no calls for revenge, but a quiet, hard resolve. If peace was not an option, then survival would have to wear armor. What came next wasn't a war in the old sense. No massive battles, no planet-cracking weapons. The Helios network fought like water, flowing around force, filling every gap, wearing down stone with patience. Their arcs didn't charge head-on. They vanished into asteroid fields, reappeared behind enemy lines, and disabled engines with targeted pulses that fried circuits but left crews unharmed. They jammed signals not with noise but with the weave, flooding enemy comms with lullabies, poetry, and recordings of children laughing, confusing their systems and their minds. The Council's ships, built for domination, weren't ready for a fight where the enemy refused to hate them. Then came the turning point. Xylos Prime, a gas giant, much like the one near New Carthage but far more unstable. The Council had gathered their main fleet there, thinking its violent magnetic storms would shield them. But the people of the network knew storms. They'd been born in them. Using crystal-powered drives and gen navigation, a small group of arcs slipped through the chaos, not to attack, but to trap. They activated a series of gravity lenses, devices that bent space itself around the fleet. In seconds, the Council's mighty armada was caught in a pocket of slowed time. Not destroyed, not hurt, just stuck. Minutes for them would be hours outside. Hours would be days. They could see the stars moving, hear faint signals from home but couldn't move, couldn't fire, couldn't escape. Then, a single arc floated into view. No weapons charged, no shields raised, just a ship alone facing an entire fleet. A voice came over every channel, not loud, not proud, just clear. You wanted us gone, we left. You called us dangerous. We healed worlds. You attacked us. We defended without killing. Now you're trapped, not by weapons, but by your own belief that force is the only answer. There was a pause. Then we can leave you here, or we can let you go. But if you choose to fight again, know this. We won't just defend. We'll show the galaxy what happens when you push kindness too far. Silence stretched. Then slowly, the Council's flagship powered down its weapons. One by one, the others followed. The gravity trap was released. The fleet drifted free, but broken, not by damage, but by shame. Back at the network's heart, there was no celebration, no victory chance. Just tired people sitting together in dim light, sharing warm drinks, holding hands. They'd won, but it didn't feel like winning. It felt like surviving one more test. When the treaty talks began, the Council expected demands: territory, resources, revenge. Instead, the network asked for one thing: an end to exile. Not just for humans, but for every species the Council had cast out. And a new rule, written in stone, in code, in every language. No one gets to decide who belongs in the galaxy. The Council resisted at first, but their own people were whispering. Their younger generations had seen the rescue at the supernova. They'd heard the stories of gardens on dead moons and schools on drifting ships. They didn't want endless control. They wanted hope. So the Treaty of Silent Stars was signed, not on paper, but in a shared data stream that linked every world, every ship, every mind that chose to join. No one knelt. No one bowed. They simply agreed. From now on, we listen before we judge. And as the first official message from Earth, finally free from the barrier, crackled through the weave, filled with tears and static and the sound of real rain, the people of the network didn't cheer. They cried, not from sadness, but from the weight of a promise kept. They'd been thrown away like trash, but they'd become the foundation. 100 years after the exile began, Earth wasn't the center of anything anymore. And that was exactly how people liked it. The old planet had healed slowly. Forests grew where cities once choked the air. Rivers ran clear again. And when the energy barrier finally dropped, it wasn't with a bang, but a sigh, like a long-held breath finally released. The first message from Earth wasn't a demand or a plea. It was just, we're listening. People from the network didn't rush back with fanfare. No grand fleets, no speeches from orbit. Just a few quiet ships landing in overgrown fields. Their crews stepping out not as conquerors or saviors, but as distant relatives returning home. They brought seeds from 100 worlds, flowers that bloomed in low gravity, trees that cleaned poisoned soil, vines that glowed softly at night. And they asked permission before planting a single one. Earth became a sanctuary, not a capital. A place to remember, not to rule. Schools taught the old languages alongside new ones. Museums didn't just show human history. They showed the full story, the mistakes, the exile, the rebuilding, and the friendships forged in the dark. Children learned that strength isn't about how far you can reach, but how gently you can hold someone else's hand. Out in the wider galaxy, the old Galactic Council was gone. In its place rose the Stellar Accord, a gathering not of rulers, but of listeners. Every species had a voice, no matter how small. Decisions weren't made by voting power or fleet size, but by consensus. If one world said, "This hurts us," the whole Accord paused. That was the human idea they'd carried forward. Care before control. The Helios network didn't become an empire. It became a promise that no one would be left behind, just because they were different, broken, or unknown. Their ships, still called Arcs, though they rarely carried refugees anymore, now delivered teachers, doctors, engineers, and artists to worlds that asked for help. Sometimes they brought clean water. Sometimes they brought music. Often they just sat and listened. And the people who'd started it all, the original exiles, were mostly gone now. But their spirit lived in every shared meal, every open door, every child who grew up believing that kindness was a kind of courage. On New Carthage, the first settlement had grown into a quiet city built into the moon's bones. Gardens spilled from lava tubes. Wind chimes made from old ship parts sang in the thin air. At the center stood a simple stone circle, not a monument to war or victory, but to memory. Engraved on each stone were words from Earth's last free broadcast before the barrier fell. "Don't forget us." And below it, added later in a dozen languages, "We didn't." Tourists came from across the spiral arm to see it. Not because it was grand, but because it was real. They'd touch the stone, look up at the swirling gas giant, and feel something hard to name. Maybe hope, maybe humility. Back on Earth, in a small coastal village where the ocean met green hills, an old woman sat on a porch watching the sunset. She'd been a child when the exile began, born on a ship with no name. She'd never seen Earth until she was 50. Now she taught young ones how to plant rice the old way, by hand in flooded fields with songs passed down from her grandmother, who'd learned them from someone even older. One evening a student asked her, "Do you ever miss the stars?" She smiled, stirring her tea. "The stars are still here," she said, pointing up, They just looked different from the ground. And it was true. The same stars that once watched over a fleet of broken ships now shone on a galaxy stitched together not by force, but by choice. By people who'd been told they didn't belong, and proved that belonging isn't given, it's built. There were still problems, of course. Disagreements, hard days, storms, both real and political. But now, when trouble came, no one faced it alone. A drought on one world meant rainseed drones from 3 others. A failing reactor? Engineers from 5 species would arrive before the alarm finished sounding. The weave hummed constantly, not with orders but with offers. Need help? We have extra. Tell us what you're going through. Historians would later write that the greatest empire humans ever built wasn't made of steel or code, but of trust. And the strangest part? They never called it an empire at all. In classrooms, children didn't learn about battles or borders. They learned about the first circle on New Carthage, how tired people chose to listen instead of fight. They learned about the supernova rescue, how strangers became neighbors in a single act of courage. And they learned the most important lesson of all, that being cast out doesn't mean you're worthless. Sometimes it just means the world isn't ready for what you carry. Now the galaxy was ready. And so life went on, not with fanfare, but with quiet dignity. Farmers harvested crops under twin suns. Artists painted with light on orbital canvases. Elders told stories to wide-eyed kids about the time humans were afraid they'd be forgotten. And every night somewhere, someone looked up at the stars and whispered, not in fear, but in gratitude, because the exiles hadn't just survived. They'd taught the stars how to shine a little brighter.